The sound of breaking glass shattered the quiet evening as Cassandra Galloway flinched, her husband's drunken rage filling their small cabin with danger that hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. It was 1878 in the harsh territory of Montana, and at 23, Cassandra had already learned that marriage wasn't the safe haven her mother had promised, especially when that marriage was to Gerald Finch, a gambler with debts as high as the Rocky Mountains that surrounded their homestead. "They're coming tomorrow," Gerald slurred, his bloodshot eyes fixed on her with a calculating gaze that made her blood run cold. "Wilson's men. I owe them $500. Cassandra's hands trembled as she swept up the remnants of the whiskey bottle. "We don't have that kind of money, Gerald." "You know that." The small pouch of coins she'd saved from selling eggs and butter was hidden beneath a loose floorboard, but it contained barely $30, the result of months of secret saving for an escape she'd never found the courage to make. "I've worked something out," Gerald muttered, stumbling to the rickety chair by the fireplace. His smile, devoid of warmth, sent a chill down her spine. "Wilson's foreman, that Richardson fellow, he's taken a liking to you." The broken glass cut into Cassandra's palm as her grip tightened in shock. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I've settled my debt. Richardson gets you and Wilson forgives what I owe." Gerald's words landed like lead in her stomach. "Pack your things. He'll be here at noon tomorrow." Cassandra stood frozen, blood dripping from her hand onto the rough-hewn floor. In that moment, she realized that to Gerald, she was nothing more than another possession to be bartered away. The 3 years of marriage, the endless work on this God-forsaken homestead, the bruises she'd hidden, all of it amounted to a transaction worth $500. "I won't go," she whispered, then louder. "I won't go." Gerald's backhand sent her sprawling across the floor. "You'll do as you're told, woman. I've signed the papers already." As Cassandra curled against the wall, she knew running was her only option. The nearest town was 15 miles away. She could never make it on foot before Gerald sobered up enough to track her down. She had no horse, no money to speak of, and nowhere to go. As the night deepened around their isolated cabin, Cassandra waited for Gerald to fall into his drunken stupor before gathering what few belongings she could carry. Dawn was just breaking when she slipped from the cabin, the sound of Gerald's snoring still rumbling inside. She'd barely made it a mile down the rutted dirt road when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Ducking behind a stand of juniper, Cassandra watched as a wagon came into view, driven by a broad-shouldered man she didn't recognize. The man pulled his horses to a stop not 10 feet from her hiding place and called out, "I know you're there. I can see your footprints in the dust." Cassandra remained still, her heart hammering in her chest. "I'm not here to hurt you, madam," the man continued, his voice gentle despite its depth. "Name's Daniel Xavier. I've got a ranch about 5 miles east of here. Was heading to town when I spotted you." Slowly, Cassandra emerged from the bushes, clutching her small bundle to her chest. Daniel Xavier was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 28, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His clothes were worn but clean, and the rifle resting across his lap looked well-maintained. "Where are you headed, madam?" he asked, his expression concerned but respectful. "Away," Cassandra answered simply, unwilling to reveal more to a stranger. Daniel nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. "I reckon you've got your reasons. Town's still a far piece off, though. I'd be happy to offer you a ride." Cassandra hesitated, weighing her options. Behind her lay Gerald and the fate he'd arranged with Richardson. Ahead lay uncertainty, but at least it was of her own choosing. "I'd be grateful for the ride," she finally said, approaching the wagon cautiously. Daniel helped her up onto the wooden seat, his calloused hands strong but careful. As the wagon lurched forward, Cassandra kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, aware of the stranger beside her but unwilling to explain her situation. They'd traveled perhaps 2 miles when the sound of a galloping horse came from behind. Daniel glanced back, then at Cassandra's suddenly pale face. "Someone you're trying to avoid?" he asked quietly. Cassandra nodded, her throat too tight for words. Daniel didn't hesitate. He handed her the reins and reached for his rifle. "Keep driving," he instructed, turning in the seat to face the approaching rider. Gerald appeared around the bend, his face twisted with rage. He reined his horse alongside the wagon, his hand already reaching for the pistol at his hip. "That's my wife you've got there, mister," Gerald snarled. "She's coming home with me." Daniel's rifle remained steady, pointed at Gerald's chest. "The lady seems to have other ideas." Gerald laughed, a harsh sound that made Cassandra flinch. "She's not just my wife, she's spoken for. Got a debt to settle, and she's the payment. So unless you want trouble with Jacob Wilson and his outfit, you'd best hand her over." Daniel's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes at the mention of Wilson's name. "Wilson, is it? The cattle baron who's been buying up all the small spreads around here?" "The very same," Gerald said with a smirk. "And his foreman Richardson has paid good money for her." "Paid you mean," Daniel said, his voice hardening. "How much does this debt run to?" $500, Gerald replied, eyeing Daniel speculatively. "Why? You looking to make an offer?" Cassandra gasped, her hands tightening on the reins until her knuckles whitened. To be discussed like livestock at auction was beyond humiliating, it was dehumanizing. Daniel's gaze flicked briefly to Cassandra, then back to Gerald. "As a matter of fact, I am. I'll give you the 500, right now in cash." Gerald's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You carrying that kind of money, cowboy?" Without lowering his rifle, Daniel reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. "Was heading to town to buy some breeding stock. This'll serve a better purpose." Cassandra stared at him in shock. "Mr. Xavier, you can't. It's just business," Daniel interrupted, though his gentle glance told her it was anything but a straight transaction. Gerald dismounted, approaching the wagon with his hand extended. "Let's see the color of your money, then." Daniel counted out the bills and coins, passing them to Gerald, who counted them again with greedy fingers. "Well now, looks like we've got a deal. She's your problem now, mister." "I'll need those papers you mentioned," Daniel said firmly. "The ones you signed for Richardson." Gerald hesitated, then reached into his shirt and pulled out a folded document. "Guess it doesn't matter who holds the marker, long as my debt's cleared." Daniel took the paper, glancing over it before tucking it inside his coat. "Our business is concluded then." Gerald mounted his horse, already counting his windfall again. With a mocking tip of his hat to Cassandra, he wheeled his horse around and galloped back the way he'd come, no doubt headed for the nearest saloon. The silence stretched between them as Cassandra struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Finally, she found her voice. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Daniel took the reins back, his hands steady as he guided the horses forward. "No man has the right to sell another human being, not a wife, not anyone, but $500. It's just money," Daniel said simply. "I can earn more." What do you expect from me?" Cassandra asked, the question she dreaded most finally finding voice. Daniel's eyes widened in understanding, and he shook his head firmly. "Nothing, Mrs. Finch. Nothing at all. That paper I bought, far as I'm concerned, it's worthless. I'll be taking you to town, and from there you're free to go wherever you please." Tears welled in Cassandra's eyes, the first she'd allowed herself in years. "I don't even know where to go. I have no family, no money." Daniel drove in silence for a moment. "I've got a proposition for you, but it's nothing like what you're thinking. I need a housekeeper at my ranch. The pay's fair, and you'd have your own cabin, at least until you decide what you want to do next." Cassandra studied his profile, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "I accept, Mr. Xavier, and thank you." Daniel's ranch, the Double X, was modest compared to Wilson's sprawling operation, but it was well maintained, with sturdy corrals and a neat two-story house built of logs and river stone. A smaller cabin stood nearby, smoke curling from its chimney. As Daniel helped Cassandra down from the wagon, an older woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Martha," Daniel called, "this is Mrs. Finch. She'll be taking over as housekeeper." Martha's weathered face creased in a welcoming smile. "About time. I've been telling this boy for months that I'm getting too old to manage the house and the cooking for all his hands." "I'm Cassandra," she said, extending her hand, "and I'm very grateful for the opportunity." Martha's sharp eyes took in Cassandra's bruised face and threadbare dress. "Well, come on in then. Let's get you settled." The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and adjustment. Cassandra found herself rising before dawn to prepare breakfast for Daniel and his 5 ranch hands, spending her days cleaning, washing, and baking. The work was demanding, but unlike her marriage, it came with appreciation and respect. Daniel was often absent during daylight hours, riding out with his men to tend to cattle, mend fences, and deal with the 1,000 tasks that running a ranch required. When their paths crossed, he was unfailingly polite, but maintained a careful distance that Cassandra both appreciated and found oddly disappointing. It was Martha who finally broached the subject one evening as they prepared supper. "That boy's sweet on you, you know." Cassandra nearly dropped the pot she was stirring. "Mr. Xavier?" "No, I think he's just kind," Martha chuckled. "Kind, yes, but I've known Daniel since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you when you're not watching. Even knowing where he found me. What I was." Cassandra couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Martha's hand on her shoulder was gentle but firm. "Child, none of that was your doing. And Daniel Xavier's not the sort of man to judge a person for the sins others committed against them." Before Cassandra could respond, the door opened, and Daniel himself entered, removing his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door. His eyes met Cassandra's briefly before he looked away, a faint color rising in his tanned cheeks. "Something smells mighty fine," he said, washing his hands at the basin. "Cassandra's made her special stew," Martha replied, giving Cassandra a meaningful glance. "I was just telling her how much everyone appreciates her cooking." Daniel nodded, his eyes warming. "Best decision I ever made bringing you on, Mrs. Finch." "Cassandra," she corrected softly. "Please call me Cassandra." Something shifted in Daniel's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Cassandra it is, then." As autumn progressed into winter, Cassandra found herself settling into life at the Double X. The small cabin Daniel had provided became a home, the first real one she'd had since leaving her parents' house as a young bride. She added little touches: curtains sewn from fabric purchased with her wages, a braided rug before the hearth, wildflowers in a jar on the table. Daniel began finding reasons to stop by the main house during the day: a question about supplies, a report on a broken fence, an offer to chop more firewood for the kitchen stove. Each time, he lingered a little longer, their conversations growing from polite exchanges to genuine discussions about books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they harbored. One snowy evening in December, Cassandra was returning to her cabin after serving dinner when Daniel appeared beside her, carrying a lantern to light her way through the drifts. "You shouldn't trouble yourself," she protested, though secretly pleased by his attentiveness. "No trouble," Daniel replied, his breath visible in the cold air. "Wanted to make sure you got home safe." When they reached her door, Daniel hesitated, seeming to wrestle with something. "Cassandra, there's a dance in town this Saturday, Christmas celebration. I was wondering if you might like to attend. With me." Cassandra's heart quickened. "Like a courting couple." Daniel's smile was nervous but hopeful. "If that would be agreeable to you, but Gerald, the paper you bought." Cassandra stumbled over the words, the memory still painful. "I burned that paper the day I brought you here," Daniel said firmly. "You've been free since that moment. Whatever you decide now is your choice alone." Cassandra looked up at him, this man who had rescued her without demanding anything in return, who had given her space and time to heal, who looked at her with respect rather than ownership in his eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "I would like that very much." The town's Christmas dance was held in the schoolhouse, decorated with pine boughs and paper stars made by the children. Cassandra wore her best dress, carefully mended and pressed, with a ribbon Martha had insisted on lending her tied in her hair. As Daniel led her through the door, his hand warm at the small of her back, she felt a flutter of nervousness and excitement. "You look beautiful," Daniel murmured as they joined the line for the first dance. Cassandra blushed, accepting his hand as the fiddles began to play. They moved together through the patterns of the dance, their bodies finding a natural rhythm. When Daniel smiled down at her, eyes crinkled at the corners, Cassandra felt something long dormant stir within her: hope, possibility, desire. As they paused for refreshments, a commotion at the door drew their attention. Jacob Wilson entered, surrounded by several of his men, including the foreman Richardson. Cassandra stiffened, shrinking back against Daniel's side. "It's all right," Daniel reassured her, his arm protectively around her waist. "You're not his to claim." But Richardson had already spotted them, his face darkening as he nudged Wilson and pointed in their direction. The cattle baron surveyed them coldly before making his way through the crowd. "Xavier," Wilson said, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby dancers. "Heard you've been harboring something that belongs to my foreman." Daniel straightened, his expression hardening. "Mrs. Finch is employed at my ranch. She belongs to no one but herself." Wilson's smile was unpleasant. "That's not how I understand it. Richardson here paid good money. He paid Gerald Finch, who had no right to sell his wife." Daniel interrupted, his voice level but carrying an edge of steel. "That transaction was illegal and immoral." Richardson pushed forward, his face flushed with anger and whiskey. "Don't matter none. I've got a paper says she's mine." "No, you don't," Daniel replied evenly. "That paper was transferred to me, and as I said, it was worthless from the start. No man can sell another human being in this country, not since the war ended such practices." The music had stopped, the dancers forming a circle around the confrontation. Cassandra felt the weight of their stares but stood tall beside Daniel, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. Wilson studied them for a long moment, calculation evident in his cold eyes. "This territory's a long way from Washington, Xavier. Out here, a man's word and a signed contract still mean something." "So does the law," came a new voice, and the crowd parted to reveal Sheriff Thomas making his way forward. "And the lady's right. Slavery's illegal in these United States, marriage certificate or no." Richardson's hand twitched toward his gun, but Wilson laid a restraining hand on his arm. "We're not here to cause trouble, Sheriff, just clarifying a business matter." "Looks clarified to me," the sheriff replied dryly. "The lady's free to work and live where she chooses." Wilson's eyes narrowed, but he nodded curtly. "For now." With a significant look at Daniel, he added, "Remember this moment, Xavier, when it comes time to renew your water rights." After Wilson and his men departed, the music slowly resumed, but the carefree atmosphere had been tainted. Daniel led Cassandra outside to the porch, where the cold air cleared away the stuffiness of the crowded room. "I'm sorry about that," Daniel said, his expression troubled. "Wilson's not a man to cross lightly." Cassandra shook her head. "You shouldn't have to face his enmity because of me." "I'd face worse to keep you safe," Daniel replied, the simple honesty in his voice making Cassandra's heart swell. He took her gloved hands in his. "Cassandra, I need to be clear about something. What I feel for you. It's not about that paper or saving you or anything else. It's just about you, who you are, your strength, your kindness." Cassandra blinked back tears as Daniel continued, his voice growing more certain with each word. "I know it's too soon. You've been through too much. But I want you to know that if you're ever ready, I'd be honored to court you properly." Cassandra looked up into his earnest face, illuminated by the light spilling from the schoolhouse windows, and made a decision. Rising on her tiptoes, she pressed a gentle kiss to his lips. "I think," she whispered as she pulled back, "that I'd like that very much." The weeks following the Christmas dance were filled with a tentative joy as Daniel and Cassandra's courtship blossomed. He brought her small gifts, a book of poetry, a carved wooden box for her sewing notions, wildflowers he'd spotted on his rides. She, in turn, packed special lunches when he had long days ahead, mended his shirts with careful stitches, and gradually shared more of her past, trusting him with the painful memories she'd kept locked away. Their first real test came in February, when Gerald Finch appeared at the ranch, sober and desperate. Cassandra was kneading bread dough when she heard his voice in the yard, and her hands froze mid-motion, flour dusting her forearms like winter frost. Martha peered out the window and clucked her tongue. "That no-good husband of yours is back. Daniel's talking to him now." Cassandra moved to the door, her heart pounding. Through the crack she could see Gerald, hat in hand, facing Daniel by the corral. "Lost it all," Gerald was saying, his voice carrying on the cold air. "Wilson cleaned me out at the poker table, then had his boys rough me up when I couldn't pay. I've got nowhere else to go." "That's a hard luck story," Daniel replied, his stance wary, "but it doesn't explain why you've come here." Gerald's gaze shifted toward the house. "I've come for my wife. She's still legally bound to me and I need her back." Daniel's voice hardened. "Mrs. Finch isn't property to be claimed, Gerald. She's made her choice and it isn't you." Gerald's expression turned ugly. "She's my wife in the eyes of God and the law. You've got no right. I've every right to protect someone who works for me," Daniel cut in. "And if you want to discuss rights, let's talk about your right to sell another human being. The sheriff might have some opinions on that." Gerald took a step forward, his hand dropping to his belt where a knife was sheathed. "I don't need the law. I'll take what's mine." Before the situation could escalate further, Cassandra pushed open the door and stepped onto the porch. Both men turned to look at her, Gerald with calculation, Daniel with concern. "Gerald," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Cassie, be reasonable," Gerald wheedled, adopting the charming tone she'd once fallen for. "We took vows. For better or worse, remember." "I remember everything," Cassandra replied, descending the steps to stand beside Daniel. "The gambling, the drinking, the bruises, and I remember you selling me to pay your debts. Those aren't the actions of a husband, they're the actions of a man who's forfeited any claim to my loyalty." Gerald's face darkened. "You ungrateful, that's enough," Daniel interrupted, his hand moving to rest near his holstered pistol. "Mrs. Finch has spoken. I suggest you leave while you still can." For a tense moment, it seemed Gerald might risk a fight. Then, Assessing the determined set of Daniel's shoulders and the unforgiving line of Cassandra's mouth, he backed down. "This isn't over," he muttered, jamming his hat back on his head. "A wife belongs with her husband. Not when that husband has proven himself unworthy of the title," Cassandra replied, standing her ground. "Goodbye, Gerald." As Gerald rode away, Cassandra felt Daniel's hand gentle on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" She nodded, surprised to discover it was true. Facing Gerald had been frightening, but it had also been liberating. "I am. For the first time in years, I truly am." Daniel's smile was warm with pride. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Cassandra Galloway." The use of her maiden name, reclaiming her identity before Gerald, brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you for standing with me." "Always," Daniel promised, and in that moment, Cassandra believed him. Spring brought new challenges as Wilson made good on his threat regarding the Double X's water rights. The creek that fed Daniel's grazing land suddenly ran dry, diverted upstream where Wilson's property bordered his. Without water, Daniel's cattle would suffer and his ranch would fail. "He's trying to drive you out," Cassandra said as they stood looking at the dusty creek bed. "Because of me." Daniel shook his head. "Wilson's been trying to buy out small ranchers for years. This is just his latest tactic." "What will you do? Fight him?" Daniel replied simply. "The water rights are legally mine. I've sent for the paperwork from the territorial office to prove it." But proving legal rights and enforcing them were different matters in the still wild territory. When Daniel rode to Wilson's ranch to confront him, he returned with a split lip and a grim expression. "His men jumped me before I could even speak to Wilson," he explained as Cassandra cleaned his wounds. "Said next time they'd do worse." "This isn't worth it," Cassandra insisted, her fingers gentle on his bruised face. "Not for me." Daniel caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. "It's not just about you, though I'd fight 10 men for your sake. It's about what's right. Wilson can't be allowed to bully everyone who stands in his way." The situation came to a head when Daniel discovered Wilson's men had deliberately stampeded a herd of cattle across his best grazing land, destroying the spring grass that was vital for his stock. The sheriff, pressured by Wilson's influence in the territory, claimed there was insufficient evidence to take action. Cassandra found Daniel sitting on the porch steps that evening, staring out at the damaged pasture with defeat in the slump of his shoulders. "We could leave," she suggested softly, sitting beside him. "Start fresh somewhere else." Daniel shook his head. "This land was my father's. He built this place from nothing, taught me everything I know about ranching. I can't just abandon it." "Then we'll fight," Cassandra said, her voice strengthening with resolve. "Together." Daniel turned to her, surprise and hope lighting his eyes. "We," Cassandra took his hand, twining her fingers with his. "Yes, we. Whatever happens, Daniel Xavier, I choose to face it at your side." The solution came from an unexpected quarter. Martha, who had connections throughout the territory from her years of living there, discovered that several other small ranchers had suffered similar tactics from Wilson. Together with Daniel, they formed an alliance, pooling resources and information. When evidence emerged that Wilson had been bribing territorial officials to overlook his water rights violations, the alliance took their case to the federal marshal. The investigation that followed revealed a pattern of corruption that extended beyond Wilson to several prominent officials. The confrontation at Wilson's ranch was tense, but ultimately bloodless. With the federal marshal and several deputies present, Wilson was served with papers ordering him to cease his illegal activities and restore the water rights he'd violated. "This isn't over, Xavier," Wilson snarled as the officials confiscated ledgers from his office. "Yes, it is," the marshal replied, "unless you want to add threatening a witness to the charges you're already facing." As spring turned to summer, life at the Double X slowly returned to normal. The creek flowed again, the pastures recovered, and Daniel's cattle thrived. With Wilson's influence diminished by the ongoing investigation, the smaller ranchers in the territory found themselves able to operate without constant threat. One warm evening in June, Daniel asked Cassandra to ride with him to a spot he wanted to show her. They traveled for nearly an hour, following the creek upstream to where it emerged from a stand of cottonwoods. There, in a small clearing carpeted with wildflowers, Daniel helped Cassandra down from her horse. "I found this place my first year on the ranch," he explained, leading her to a fallen log where they could sit. "I come here when I need to think, or when life gets too complicated." Cassandra looked around at the peaceful setting, understanding why he treasured it. "It's beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," Daniel replied, taking her hands in his. "Cassandra, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Having you at the Double X, watching you grow stronger and more confident every day, it's been a privilege." Cassandra felt her heart quicken as Daniel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, carved with the same careful attention he gave to everything he created. "I know your first marriage was a prison," he continued, his voice gentle but steady. "And I would understand if you never wanted to enter that institution again. But I love you, Cassandra Galloway, and I want to spend my life with you as your husband, if you'll have me, or simply as the man who loves you, if that's what you prefer." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small, perfect sapphire. "This was my mother's ring. My father saved for 2 years to buy it for her." Tears blurred Cassandra's vision as she looked from the ring to Daniel's earnest face. "You would accept less than marriage." "I would accept whatever terms allowed me to love you," Daniel answered honestly. Cassandra felt a rush of emotion so powerful it left her breathless. This man, who had literally purchased her freedom without demanding anything in return, was now offering her the choice that mattered most, the freedom to define their relationship on her terms. "Daniel Xavier," she said, her voice clear despite her tears, "I would be honored to be your wife. Not because any paper says I must, but because I choose you freely and completely." The joy that transformed Daniel's face was worth every hardship she'd endured to reach this moment. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, his kiss a promise of the future they would build together. Their wedding, held at the Double X with the entire community in attendance, was everything Cassandra's first marriage ceremony had not been: joyful, honest, and entered into with clear eyes and full hearts. As they spoke their vows beneath an arch of summer roses, Cassandra felt the last shadows of her past finally recede. "I take you not as my possession, but as my partner," Daniel said, his voice carrying across the assembled guests. "I offer not ownership but companionship, not control but support, not dominance but respect." "And I choose you," Cassandra replied, "not from necessity but from love, not from obligation but from desire, not from fear but from hope." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from their friends and neighbors. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with dancing, feasting, and heartfelt toasts to the couple's happiness. When they finally retired to the main house, now their shared home, Daniel carried Cassandra across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in the parlor that had been transformed with fresh paint and new curtains for their married life. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," he said softly. Cassandra smiled up at him, her heart full. "I've been home since the day you found me on that dusty road. I just didn't know it yet." Daniel pulled her close, his arms strong and secure around her. "When I paid Gerald that money, I thought I was just buying your freedom. I never imagined I was also buying my own happiness." You didn't buy me, Daniel, Cassandra corrected gently. You set me free, and in doing so, you gave me the greatest gift possible, the ability to choose you for myself. As they stood together in the home they would share, Cassandra reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a woman bartered away to settle a debt to a woman who had found her strength, her voice, and her true partner, it was a transformation she could never have imagined that terrifying night in Gerald's cabin. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That sometimes," Cassandra replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. "The darkest moments lead us to the brightest light. And you, Daniel Xavier, are the light I never dared hope for." As Daniel's arms tightened around her, Cassandra knew with absolute certainty that the price he had paid that day on the road, $500 that had purchased not a woman, but a chance at love, had indeed been paid with his heart. And in return, she had given him hers, not because any paper demanded it, but because love, freely given, was the only currency that truly mattered.